Thank you all for being here. I'm Congressman Joaquin Castro and very proud to represent our hometown of San Antonio in the U.S. House of Representatives. And want to say a special thank you today to the representatives who have joined me, my colleague in the U.S. House of Representatives who also represents a big part of San Antonio, Greg Casar. Also, two state representatives, Trey Martinez Fisher, who represents the West and the Northwest side, and also Representative Barbara Gervin Hawkins, who represents big parts of the East Side and the Northeast side. I want to say thank you to them for being here. Today, myself and 14 of my colleagues are asking that China Grove, Balcones Heights, Hollywood Park, St. Hedwig, Von Army, and Sandy Oaks, cities within Bexar County, end their 287G agreements with ICE. For those that aren't familiar, 287G refers to Section 287G of the Immigration and Nationality Act, a federal law that lets ICE deputize state and local police officers to carry out federal immigration enforcement. These 6 cities signed on to what's called a task force model, specifically, the version that allows local officers to stop, question, and detain people based on nothing more than suspicion that they may be in the country illegally. Now, this is, as y'all can imagine, has led to a lot of racial profiling within Bexar County and around the country. And it effectively turns a hometown police department into an arm of federal immigration enforcement. So they're turning local law enforcement into ICE agents and receiving money to do that. In fact, after talking to some council members and at least one of the mayors of the cities, I believe that a big part of the reason that they're doing this is they're trying to balance their budgets with this money, because they receive money for each officer that is trained to carry out this partnership with ICE. Bear in mind that ICE has become a rogue, abusive organization under Donald Trump. We've seen their brutality on the streets, but also I've seen their brutality, as has Greg, behind the closed doors of places like the Dilley Trailer Prison. We've seen this cruelty in San Antonio as well. And as I said, they're racially profiling folks. So if you are someone who has brown skin, who speaks Spanish in public, or who works a certain job or goes to a certain place, they've been staking out places like Home Depot and Lowe's and other places where hardworking men and women will go to get supplies. And bear in mind, we shouldn't forget that Greg Abbott is a full partner in Donald Trump's mass deportation campaign. The excess, the cruelty, the warrantless searches, the guns drawn, the masks, all of it, Greg Abbott is just as responsible as Donald Trump in Texas. He's partnered with the Trump administration and flooded our streets with ICE officers and also DPS officers who are working hand in hand with what has become a rogue, abusive agency. They're going after children and folks who have no criminal record and who have done nothing wrong. And that includes, as y'all know, US citizens who have been ensnared in this, legal permanent residents, and even folks who have permission to be in the country and work authorization. So let me be clear, these agreements should end because people like 20-year-old Herbert Ibarra Castro end up locked up. This was a story of Herbert, who was a mariachi performer. What started out as a routine traffic stop for the San Antonio mariachi student turned into his family's worst nightmare. He was pulled over for speeding in China Grove. Minutes later, ICE showed up and took him. Herbert was married to a US citizen and had just filed paperwork for his green card. Since then, Herbert's been released, but he should have never been locked up in the first place. And over a month ago, Texas DPS stopped Jesus Bracco on his way to work. He was with his 9-year-old daughter, Catherine. DPS called ICE, took Jesus, and minutes later returned for Catherine so that they could take her as well. And ICE forced Jesus to lure his daughter out of his boss's house. And I posted that video, and others have as well, on social media. She was scared and didn't know where she was being taken. And they're both still sitting at the Dilley Trailer Prison. Because of these 287G agreements, local law enforcement officers are essentially partners in ICE's cruelty. And our community in many places is scared and terrified. Some students in San Antonio stopped showing up at school. Folks are afraid to show up to their places of worship or even go to work. Businesses have lost employees. Some businesses have told me that either they've shut down or they're on the verge of shutting down and going broke. And that's why we're calling on the mayors of Balcones Heights, China Grove, St. Hedwig, Von Army, Sandy Oaks, and Hollywood Park to reconsider and to withdraw these contracts. Our communities deserve police who protect them, not law enforcement that fuels Donald Trump and Greg Abbott's mass deportation machine. With that, I'd like to bring up my colleague who represents both San Antonio and Austin in the I-35 corridor, Congressman Greg Casar.
Thank you, Congressman Castro. I'm so grateful for all of my colleagues across Bexar County that have signed onto this important letter. Our ask today is simple. Mayors across Bexar County need to stop signing up their police to do Donald Trump's ICE enforcement. We're here to tell them, get out, cut it out. We do not need our communities selling out. We do not need our communities balancing their budgets through harassment, discrimination, and Trump's abusive ICE. This task force model of these 287G agreements turn our local law enforcement into federal immigration agents, often without oversight, without training, and without doing this work safely. These 287G agreements let officers stop and arrest people just because they're suspected of being undocumented. And this is not hypothetical. In places that have signed these deals, sheriff's departments have set up checkpoints outside of Latino neighborhoods, and they've pulled people over just for looking like so many of us here in San Antonio. This is a majority Hispanic city, and that means our neighbors are the people who will be targeted. And we know what that looks like here in Texas and across this country. Donald Trump promised that he would go after, quote, the worst of the worst, but we know who he's actually going after. Dads at job sites, kids at schools, grandmothers on the way to church. Victims of domestic violence are being arrested by police officers and handed over to ICE. And so then survivors of crime are scared of calling the police. We need our local law enforcement here in Bexar County responding to 911 calls, not arresting dads who are just trying to go to work. We need our police officers solving cold cases, keeping us safe from crime, not being used by Donald Trump to arrest so many thousands of people that have zero criminal history at all. Se lo digo para los medios en español. Estos tratos de 287 están causando caos en nuestra comunidad. Necesitamos que nuestros policías estén protegiéndonos, no discriminando y ayudándole al ICE de Donald Trump. Estos tratos no están buscando los criminales, están arrestando a trabajadores, están arrestando a nuestras abuelas, están discriminando en nuestra comunidad hispana aquí en San Antonio y por todo nuestro país. Here in San Antonio, kids are missing school out of fear. Edgewood ISD administrators have already said that Trump's immigration enforcement and Greg Abbott's immigration abuse are already making it worse for our schools. And after last year's floods, some undocumented Texans said they were afraid to seek help because they feared Donald Trump and Greg Abbott's abuse of our immigration system. These 287G ICE agreements are making Bexar County less safe. Estos tratos con ICE están haciendo nuestra comunidad menos segura. Necesitamos que los policías estén buscando a los criminales, pero por estos tratos están arrestando a gente inocente. So to every Bexar County mayor, your job is to protect your constituents, to take care of our safety, not to balance your budget by doing Donald Trump's bidding, not to volunteer your police officers for ICE when we know that there's 911 calls to respond to, when we know that there are cold cases to investigate. Read the letter, answer our questions, and get out of this program. I want to hand the microphone over to a real champion here in Bexar County who has been working on these issues for his whole career, and that is Representative Trey Martinez-Fisher.
Thank you, Congressman. In the criminal defense world, probable cause is a reasonable suspicion that a crime is about to occur. And that's what gives law enforcement the authority to pull over and detain someone for a pre-detention investigation. In the 287G program, the probable cause definition is driving while brown. And that is the standard that is being used in these communities. And we are all susceptible to that detention. And let's not mince words that we are all vulnerable in that regard. ICE is willing to arrest a nun in her official garments walking to church. They will arrest anybody. And so as far as I know, in the district that I represent and share with both these gentlemen behind me, you cannot get to Balcones Heights without going through San Antonio. And you cannot leave Balcones Heights without going to San Antonio. And the notion that we have been telling our folks to be good citizens, to be good residents, follow the law, speak out, see something, say something, police officers are our friend. We are now sending the wrong message. And even worse, while it's a problem for Balcones Heights, this becomes a law enforcement problem for the city of San Antonio. Now, when residents fail to cooperate, when residents fail to report, this is not just a Hollywood Park problem. This is a Bexar County problem. And I would say that if, just to keep it all level, these are very small communities too. And so what is also being lost in this discussion is those of you who give your careers to seek the truth and to share that information with the public, where was the discussion in all of this? Where was the community input? Where was the feedback? Where was the pro and con? And what would prevent a city leader, a city mayor, a city manager from putting this up for a public hearing, taking public comment? We do it all the time. We're doing it now for a sports and entertainment district right here. We can do this for the betterment of our fellow, human being who lives in our community. And so for me, the bigger question is, if we're not going to have the discussion about whether this is appropriate and proper for the 6th largest city in the United States of America, then we have elections. We have them in May for these small towns. And maybe it's a good question to ask the citizens of Balcones Heights, the voters of Balcones Heights. Do you think it's enough to work night and day to pay your property taxes and your sales taxes and your gas taxes? And when you thought you've done your part, now your federal tax dollars are also being taxed, sent back to your community to work against you. That's the position of your mayor. That's what your mayor thinks your job is. And do you agree with that? And if you agree with that, well, let's vote for this mayor next May. If you don't, let's get somebody else there who has the courage and the conviction and humanity to make this a public question to see whether or not this is appropriate for communities like Balcones Heights. So I would encourage those mayors to understand that just like myself and my colleagues, we have to go before the voters every couple of years. We have to defend our record. This is our job interview. Perhaps we ought to put this on the interview item to discuss whether or not this is something we should be doing this day and age in this political climate with everything that we have seen and all the violence that has occurred. Is this something that we need to be doing? San Antonio is a very proud history of standing up for the little person. And this is the time to do that. And if it takes the larger community of Bexar County to step up and say, we will be the voice when we won't get that sort of attention internally, that's what I hope today accomplishes. To let these mayors know that we are not taking this personal as an attack on their leadership, but now that it's been called into question, you have a choice to make. Continue to ignore us and accept these federal dollars and put our own folks at risk, or to have an honest and responsible discussion to see if whether we are doing the right thing. And I believe that's all that letter says. And so in this business, silence is acquiescence. And so we're not going to be silent on this. And we look forward to hearing from every single mayor. And as I understand from the congressman, folks are already beginning to give responses. And so I think the intended effect is already taking place, but we will not stop until we hear from everybody. Thank you. And at this time, I'm pleased to bring up my colleague in the House, someone who I admire and respect a great deal, and that is Representative Barbara Gervin Hawkins.
Good afternoon, everybody. I want you all to know today I stand with my federal colleagues and my state colleagues about the injustice and the inhumanity that's happening through and with our U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, particularly this program, the 287G. Many may not know, but the negative impacts of this program go on for generations and generations to come. It impacts our communities and it impacts our young people who are being terrorized. Most importantly, it erodes the community trust within our public safety. That trust we're trying to rebuild and strengthen. Think about it. Our communities will be afraid of our first responders. Crimes will become unreported. Victims of crime will be re-victimized. Racial profiling, something I know well, will rise. This is not what our forefathers envisioned for us or our country. Now, I will continue as we join together in this fight for injustice and stand for humane treatment for everybody. But today, my message is specifically to the people of San Antonio, Bexar County, and all the cities that are impacted. I know we're facing difficult times ahead. I know that. I know that there's budget shortages in different cities and municipalities. But here's the deal. Let's not sell out. Let's not sell out to wrong. Because we have an obligation, a fiduciary responsibility to get involved in creating an America that we all can not only just survive in, but thrive. Our forefathers and mothers didn't die for this. They suffered so that we could have a greater opportunity. So I'm calling on our allies too. This ain't just a black or a brown issue. This is a humanitarian issue. When we talk about picking up children, separating families, people who are trying to do the right thing, and we're picking them up like they're doing something wrong. Now, I will say this in finality here. Our vote is our voice. We must vote to be able to bring in the leadership. And I'm not talking about individuals. What I'm talking about is policy. Policy that support people, not hurt people. So come November, that's the beginning of our fight, our unified fight together to stop this nonsense. And then come May, as my colleague indicated, let's look at your local officials. But today, our fight is a humanitarian fight. I don't care if you wear a blue shirt or a red shirt. If you're a lover of God and of treating your neighbor like you would yourself, you'll stand with us and fight for real and not be a sellout and just stand on the sidelines saying, oh, it's them.
All right, thank you all. With that, we'll take some questions if y'all have them.
Cities like Mount County's Heights, they can barely handle a car accident by themselves tonight. How can they take on this task of being ICE agents on top of their regular duties?
No, that's a great question. You know, small cities already struggle with law enforcement issues within their boundaries. And this is just going to strain their capacity even more. Now, a big part of the reason they're doing this is some of them have budget shortfalls or they're trying to balance their budgets. And ICE is throwing money at cities, particularly small cities, to become essentially ICE agents alongside the federal government. And so as you can imagine, if you're struggling with a budget, it becomes very tempting to grab that money. But we're saying that when you do that, you're putting your people at risk and you're overextending yourself. You're also risking the livelihood of your businesses because we've seen that people are afraid to go to places where they think ICE officers or law enforcement officers who are working with ICE are going to be. So it's a bad deal all around, and we're asking them to reconsider and to terminate these agreements.
Have you heard back from any of the 6 mayors of the cities yet?
Yeah, my staff told me just before we came up here that we've gotten a response from China Grove. I didn't have a chance to read it because we were coming right up, but I want to thank the mayor, if that's the case, for responding in a prompt manner. And I'll reach out to him, and we will reach out to him after that.
When you're talking about the 287G agreements, are you also talking about the collaboration of jails, like the Bexar County jail?
Yeah, I mean, so there are 3 different models, and the jail model is the one that the county has. And This one is the most extensive one that puts ICE agents out on the streets. I think that every jurisdiction should reevaluate their cooperation with ICE. You know, and so that includes anyone in Bexar County that is cooperating. And the reason I say that is because I said ICE has become an abusive and rogue organization at this point. And for that reason, all of these relationships need to be reexamined. I want to add anything? Yes.
I don't know if you hear about the case that we had yesterday about Brian Carrera from Honduras was arrested for stop and traffic in January, and he's married with citizen.
I don't, as you can imagine, we've gotten, you know, every day we get a ton of outreach from folks on different cases. I can't remember that one in particular, but I'm glad to look into it.
What do you say to the cities and jurisdictions that feel the pressure and maybe misunderstand the sanctuary law? I know that is brought up, and I know that San Antonio dealt with it as well, and it was very expensive. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, you know, in many ways, local law enforcement is in a tough spot. The reason they're in a tough spot is because Governor Abbott, through SB4 and through a lot of pressure that he's put on mayors, on local law enforcement, has essentially forced them to partner with ICE. And so they're caught between what they feel is following the law, and at the same time, there are many folks that have deep concerns about what ICE is doing. But the reason that we singled out these jurisdictions, these 6, is because they have gone above and beyond what is required even by Texas law. So they are taking the most severe partnership and running with it and taking that money, and I believe putting their people at risk.
Has your office been able to get any kind of data on arrests or funding or anything like that?
That's what we're asking for, yeah, in our letter. We're asking each of the cities for more information on all of those things.
You guys spoke about how people are more afraid to talk with the police or the local law enforcement. Have you guys received any numbers for Crime Stoppers or from the Bexar County Sheriff about how people are not reaching out with tips or videos or just talking with the police in the streets when they need the help from the residents?
We've come across it often in conversations. Like I said, my staff is on the phone literally every day with people who will tell us that, you know, my father is in the Carnes Detention Center, or my mom's in Pearsall, or my relatives are all at Dilley. And so we've heard in many of those conversations, those kind of remarks and those kinds of concerns.
Yeah,
Please.
You know, if you ask anyone, it's extremely clear. When I talk to medical professionals that run health clinics, they talk about how when in the news there's immigration raids or ICE has killed someone, that suddenly appointments start being canceled. When a community sees ICE officers or DPS pulling people over and arresting people in the streets that are just trying to get to school, we hear from school teachers and from school counselors and even school administrators that you can bet that school enrollment is going to be down that week. And there's nobody I talk to that hasn't seen the video of United States citizens being shot and killed in the street. And so my message to these small city mayors, and to your question here, Nancy, is the law is very clear. Our cities have a responsibility to protect people's safety. So why would we go and work with a rogue agency that has been killing US citizens in the streets and has been claiming impunity? If you are the mayor of a city, you're going to be judged by your voters on whether or not police officers are getting out to a 911 call. You're going to be judged on whether the trash is picked up and the streets are safer. By taking this money, you are signing yourself up for those law enforcement officers that you need to be getting to the 911 call because there's a crime in progress or because there's a major car accident. Now they could be diverted by ICE for doing something that nobody here is asking for people to do, which is separate families, arrest innocent people. The last thing that I'll add is, you know, in my view, we've been talking about this election. Democrats will retake the U.S. House of Representatives. And then it will be my message to Stephen Miller, to the people in charge of ICE, to the people who are abusing people in San Antonio and across the country is that accountability will come. And with subpoena power, we will be asking those folks in charge, how is it that we still have kids in Dilley who have been locked up there for months entirely against US law? How is it that innocent people, you mentioned Mr. Cabrera just now, how dads and moms and people who are US citizens or who are married to US citizens have been targeted for arrest or have been deported against judges' orders or against due process? We'll be asking questions about how San Antonio lawyers who have been representing kids have had their contracts canceled, have been thrown off of cases because Stephen Miller wants to deport more children out of this country. I mean, they think right now that they can just get away with this, but accountability will come. And I urge voters to be asking their elected officials whether they think they'll be held accountable, and if they will ask those responsible to come in and answer questions under oath in front of the American people.
My last, it will be like both of the teams, you, Casar and Castro, you both have talked about cases of men that have been arrested and are in Dilley, Pearsall, and Karnes. But I want to say like more than half of those cases are leaving mothers alone with 3, 4 kids, most of them with autism. They cannot work. I want to hear your perspective on how this 287G is provoking that more of these mothers are leaving home, are being left alone at home.
Sure.
Let me add
Go for it,
this.
Lauren.
Yeah, let me add this. Remember, there's 3 models involved. What these cities have done is adopted the worst model. Okay, so when we look at residents of these cities, we're saying let's advocate. If you have to participate because you need the revenue, okay, let's not do the worst models, okay, and that is arresting people and incarcerating people. So I think these cities should be rethinking the model that they want to adopt. They do have a choice, and I think that's important. But when we're leaving these parents, these mothers who are, again, we're terrorizing and creating a level of fear that's so hurtful to our overall community, is a travesty. We even have teachers who are afraid to come to school, folks that don't want to go to their jobs. Again, I relate, this is a humanitarian issue that we must address as a collective so that we hear all voices to stop this.
And I'll just add to that. You're right. You know, we often talk about the people that are detained, that are in detention. But oftentimes the people they leave behind outside, their lives are devastated. I remember a few months ago going to the Karnes Detention Center, I believe, and meeting a man who had been in the country for 27 years. And he was arrested with his dad, I believe, at a Lowe's or Home Depot or a similar store. And he told me that he was the sole breadwinner for he and his family. And his wife, I believe, he and his wife had 3 daughters, as I recall. And he talked about how they were going broke now that he was in detention and wasn't able to get out. I've talked to families who have lost their businesses, their small businesses, people that have lost their apartments and homes. And so this is wrecking the lives, not only of the people that are sitting in Dilley or Karnes or Pearsall or, you know, in other places like Delaney Hall or Adelanto across the country, but it's wrecking families. And that's what Donald Trump and Greg Abbott want. They want to wreck families. They know what they're doing. They know what they're doing. And they're doing everything they can to force people out. And I saw a report just yesterday that San Antonio, I believe it said, had lost about 8,000 jobs because of this mass deportation campaign. So it's wrecking our economy as well. And then, you know, I know we're talking about 6 specific cities within Bexar County. San Antonio is obviously the large city in Bexar County. So there may be a temptation by some to ask the question, well, why does a particular representative, if they don't represent that particular city, well, why do they care what happens in this city or that city? Well, let me say this. For me, my constituents drive through all of these towns every single day. Somebody that I represent, in fact, I'm sure many people I represent, drive through these cities every single day. And that's the case for all of us who have signed on to this letter. And I actually think that if you look at those cities, I think they're all represented at some level of government by the people, at least one of the people who has signed on to the letter.
Yeah, what, to
Yep.
what you were just saying, I was thinking about that, how you have these, small cities within a larger city, but a lot of people just think of that as just being another part of San Antonio.
Sure.
And so when you think about that cooperation, is that where a lot of those agreements came into play in the first place because of a lack of the city's cooperation with ICE?
The lack of San Antonio's cooperation or,
Yeah, the lack of, because we're not, it's not the city of San Antonio, but it's all these areas within San Antonio. So
go ahead.
I guess,
Well, look, the city of San Antonio and San Antonio police comply with federal and state law, including some federal and state laws that folks that represent San Antonio have advocated against. They comply with the laws. What's happening here with these 287G agreements is cities giving up their police officers from their police duties and giving them over for ICE. And I have talked to virtually no one in town that thinks that's a good idea. Look, I'm a Democrat, I'm a progressive, but I recognize that here in Texas, a majority of voters voted for Donald Trump. But those voters, everybody here in Texas, including those who voted for Donald Trump, were lied to. Donald Trump said he was going to bring down prices on day one. We've seen grocery prices skyrocket, gas prices skyrocket. Donald Trump said he was going to end these wars. Instead, he's taken us into war after war after war, and then he gets out of a war and then gets back into it. And then Donald Trump said he was going to try to keep people safe. And right here in San Antonio, there is a program where Donald Trump and Greg Abbott are taking cops away from their policing duties, taking them off of responding to 911 calls, taking them off of solving crimes, and instead are bribing cities to have them go separate families, to have them have dads taken off of their construction site, moms left with kids not being able to work, take care of their kids, devastating communities, wrecking families. So whether you voted Democratic, Independent, or Republican, Donald Trump lied on prices. He lied about wars, and he very clearly lied when he said he was going to try to make us more safe. And this should be example number one.
And I want to be
Please.
clear, the city and the county is participating. So don't leave here with that narrative, okay? What we're talking about is on this agreement, the 287G agreement is truly the extreme. And that's what we're talking about.
One last question, anybody?
una pregunta, no sé si en español,
Sí,
César,
claro.
le iba a preguntar, en un caso que esta carta ellos no la toman en consideración, ¿cuál sería el paso siguiente de ustedes hacia estas pequeñas ciudades donde está permitido hacer esto?
Mira, los votantes tienen que decidir si quieren apoyar a sus alcaldes en las elecciones en mayo, si están quitándole la prioridad a la seguridad y le están dando en vez la prioridad a deportar a familias inocentes. O sea, a final de cuentas, los votantes, sé que los de votantes sean demócratas, independientes o republicanos, quieren seguridad, quieren que la policía responde rápidamente si tienes una emergencia. Pero lo que están haciendo con estos tratos, estas ciudades pequeñas, es por un poquito de dinero, están quitándole la prioridad a la seguridad y están dándole prioridad a separar familias.
All right, y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sean.